My own daughter stood there in the gravel and told me I was a weight that should have been buried right alongside her mother. Then her husband pitched my suitcase into the mud, climbed back into his truck, and drove off, leaving me standing in front of a sagging farmhouse 40 miles from the nearest stoplight. 6 days later, that same phone of mine lit up 47 times in a single night. "Dad, please, you have to call me back. What did you do?" But by then there wasn't a single thing left worth saying to either of them. My name is Calvin Brandt. I turned 67 this past March, and I have spent almost every working hour of my life with grease under my fingernails. For 41 years, I ran a diesel garage off Route 20 outside Erie, Pennsylvania. Truckers knew me. Farmers knew me. If a man's rig died on the interstate at 2 in the morning in January, mine was the number he called, and I went. I'm telling you all this not to brag, but so you understand the kind of man I was before any of this happened. A man who paid his bills, kept his word, and believed, God help me, that the people I loved would do the same for me. I want to thank you for sitting with me while I tell this. If any part of it lands on you the way it lived in me, do me a kindness and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment telling me what town you're listening from. There's a whole lot of us out here who've been treated like we stopped mattering the day we slowed down. I like knowing where you all are. To understand how I ended up dumped at the old Stillwell place like a busted appliance, you have to know about Ruth. Ruth was my wife for 38 years. She was a billing clerk at St. Mal, Vincent's hospital, sharp as a tack. The only person alive who could make me laugh when I was dead set on being miserable. We had one child, a daughter, and we raised her in a little brick house on Fenton Street that I paid off 2 years early because Ruth couldn't stand owing anybody anything. We weren't wealthy, but we had a paid-off house, a decent retirement I'd scraped together, and each other, and for most of my life that felt like more than enough. Then 2 springs ago, Ruth had a stroke at the kitchen sink. I was out in the garage. By the time I came in to ask what she wanted for supper, she was on the floor. She held on 4 days in the ICU, and then she was gone, and a part of me I've never gotten back went with her. My daughter came to the funeral looking like grief itself. She held my hand at the graveside. She told me, "Dad, you can't rattle around that house alone. It'll kill you." And her husband. I'll call him my son-in-law because that's all the man ever really was to me. He put his arm around my shoulders and said, "We've got you, Calvin. Family takes care of family." I believed every word. I was so hollowed out I'd have believed near anything that sounded like a soft place to land. That's where I made my first mistake, and it's the one I'd warn any of you against more than the rest. Don't let anybody handle your affairs while you're still numb from a loss. Don't sign your name to one single piece of paper you haven't read 3 times with clear eyes. And if you don't understand what you're signing, you stop right there and you get yourself a lawyer, even if it costs you, even if it feels like you're insulting your own kin. I didn't do any of that. I was too busy drowning. It started small, the way these things do. My son-in-law sat me down at their dining room table a few weeks after the funeral with a folder thick as a phone book. "I'm just going to get everything organized for you so you don't have to think about it," he said. "Power of attorney so I can pay your bills without bothering you. Get your name added to some forms, routine stuff." He slid papers across the table and pointed where to sign, and I signed. My hand was shaking so bad half those signatures looked like a child wrote them. I trusted him because he was married to my girl, and my girl was the last living piece of Ruth I had. Over the next couple of months I signed away more than I can stand to think about, a power of attorney that gave him the run of my checking and savings, a deed, a quitclaim I learned later, that was supposed to put the Fenton Street house into a trust to protect it, which is a thing he said over and over. "Protect your assets, Dad. Protect your assets." My truck got sold because, he said, the insurance was a waste of money for a man who shouldn't be driving at his age. My retirement account got rolled over into something I never saw a statement for again. By that summer I owed nothing. Not the house Ruth and I paid off. Not a vehicle. Not the few $1,000s I kept in a separate account for emergencies that she never knew about. He'd hoovered up every cent and every deed, and I'd handed him the vacuum. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, sitting in their guest room watching cable and feeling like a burden, was that my son-in-law's whole life was a brush fire moving fast toward the house. He flipped properties, bought run-down places, slapped lipstick on them, sold them high. For years it worked because the market only ever went up. But he'd gotten greedy and overextended, carrying 6 houses at once on borrowed money, and when interest rates climbed and buyers dried up, he was suddenly stuck holding 6 mortgages and not one sale. I'd hear him through the wall at night pacing, his voice low and frantic on the phone. I just need 90 days. The appraisal came in low. I can't do anything about the appraisal. Tell him I'm good for it. Tell him to give me until the end of the month. 90 days became 180. The end of the month came and went and came again. There was a man named Pruitt he owed real money to, a hard money lender who'd fronted him cash for 2 of the flips. I only know the name because one evening Pruitt himself showed up on the porch, and I heard him through the screen door tell my son-in-law plain as church bells, "You're into me for 240,000. I've been more than patient. You bring me something by the first or we stop being friendly." After he left, my daughter and her husband had a fight in the kitchen that I pretended not to hear. And at the worst of it, I heard her say the words that I'll carry to my own grave. "Then we get rid of the dead weight. The old man's eating us alive." The dead weight was me. A few mornings later, my son-in-law came into the guest room before I'd even had coffee. "Pack a bag, Calvin," he said. "Just the basics. We found you somewhere better." Something in how flat he said it made my stomach drop. I asked where. He wouldn't look at me. "Somewhere you can have your independence back. You'll like it. Lots of fresh air." I packed one old duffel, 2 changes of clothes, my pill bottles, Ruth's reading glasses, which I had no use for but couldn't leave behind, a framed photo of the 2 of us at Presque Isle the summer before she died. 67 years on this earth, and everything that mattered fit in a bag I could carry in one hand. "That's a thing that'll humble you, let me tell you." My daughter rode along, which I took, fool that I was, as a sign she cared. The drive went south and then east, off the interstate onto county roads, then onto roads that turned from blacktop to chip seal to plain dirt. The land got wilder. Old hayfields gone to weed, oak and hickory crowding in, hills folding over hills. And the longer we drove, the more I started to recognize it, because I'd been born in that country. We were headed toward Greer's Mill, toward the little hill farm my own father had worked, until the day he died. See, here's the part my son-in-law never bothered to learn, because he never bothered to ask me a single real question about my life. That falling down farmhouse he was hauling me to wasn't some stranger's abandoned wreck. It was the Stillwell place, my mother's family name, 90 acres of ridge and hollow that my daddy left to me free and clear when he passed in 1986. I'd moved to the city at 18 and never lived there again, but I'd kept it, paid the little bit of taxes every year out of stubbornness and sentiment. My son-in-law had found it buried in my paperwork, decided it was worthless backwards, nobody would ever want, and figured it was the perfect spot to dump a man and forget him. What he didn't know, because he was too lazy and too crooked to do it right, was that he never actually managed to take it from me at all. But I didn't know any of that yet either. All I knew, as the truck rocked up that washed-out lane and the old house came into view with its caved porch and its black, empty windows, was that my own children were leaving me to die in the woods. We stopped. My son-in-law got out, dragged my duffel from the bed, and dropped it in the mud. My daughter stayed in the cab. She rolled down her window and looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. "It's the best we can do, Dad," she said. "You're tougher than you let on. You'll figure it out." And then, quieter, like it cost her nothing, "You should have gone with Mom. It would have been easier on everybody. I have heard a lot of cruel things in 67 years. Nothing has ever cut me like that." My son-in-law was already back behind the wheel. "Don't call us," he said through the window. Phone won't do you much good out here anyhow." Then the engine roared and they went bouncing back down that lane in a cloud of brown dust, and I stood there in front of my dead father's house, a 67-year-old man with a duffel bag and a photograph, listening to the sound of my own blood leaving me until all I could hear was wind moving through trees that had no business being that tall. That first night was the longest of my life, longer even than the 4 nights at Ruth's bedside. The cold came up out of the ground once the sun dropped. There was no power, no water that I could find, no glass in half the windows. I cleared a corner of what had been the parlor, spread out the spare clothes from my bag for padding, wrapped myself in my coat, and lay there shaking and listening to the house tick and groan and to whatever was scuttling in the walls. I don't mind telling you I cried like a boy. Not for the cold, for my girl. For the look on her face. But somewhere in the worst of that night I heard Ruth. Not really. I'm not telling you I saw a ghost. I just heard her the way you hear someone you spent 40 years beside, plain in my own head. She used to say, whenever I got to feeling sorry for myself, "Calvin Brandt, you have built engines from a box of broken parts. Don't you dare tell me you can't build yourself a morning." So I made it to morning. And then I made it to the next one. The first week was nothing but staying alive. I rationed the granola bars I'd thrown in my bag down to half a bar a day. I found an old hand pump out back, primed it with rainwater I caught in a coffee can, and after an hour of cussing and cranking it coughed up cold, clear well water. That water saved my life, and I'll come back to that water, because it turned out the Lord wasn't done with it yet. My hands, 67 years old and still good, patched the worst window holes with cardboard and a roll of duct tape I found rusted to a shelf in the barn. A diesel mechanic learns to make do. You'd be surprised what a man can fix when fixing is the only thing standing between him and freezing. By the second week, hunger drove me down out of the hills. I'd seen on the drive-in a little crossroads about 2 miles down. A feed store, a diner, a church, not much else. I had $26 in my wallet that my son-in-law hadn't thought to take. So I walked it. Took me most of 2 hours on bad knees. There was a feed and hardware with a lunch counter in the back, and behind that counter stood a big, slow-moving fellow about my age and the small, bright-eyed woman in an apron. The little bell over the door rang when I came in, and the woman looked up and took one good look at me. Unshaven, mud-caked, smelling like a man who'd been sleeping on a parlor floor, and instead of suspicion her face filled up with plain concern. "Lord, honey," she said, "you look like you walked out of a hard winter. Sit down before you fall down." That was Lottie Hargrove, and the big fellow was her husband, Dewey. They ran that store and that counter and, near as I could tell, half the goodness in that whole valley. I told them I was staying up at the old Stillwell place, and Dewey set down the rag he was holding. "Nobody's lived up there since the Reagan years," he said. "That roof's not fit to keep rain off a goat. How'd you come to be up there?" And I don't know if it was the warmth of the place or the smell of coffee or just that I'd been alone with my own heartbreak for 2 weeks, but it all came pouring out of me. Ruth, the funeral, the papers I signed, my daughter's face in that truck window. I expected them to look at me like I was a fool because I'd been a fool. Instead, Lottie came around the counter and set a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes in front of me that I hadn't ordered and couldn't pay for. And Dewey said low, "A child does that to a parent. There's a special accounting waiting on them. You don't worry about that part. You just eat." I tried to leave my $26 on the counter. Lottie pushed it right back at me. "You insult me with that," she said. "You'll really see me get cross. I wasn't raised to take charity." So the next day I came back, and I asked Dewey if there was anything around the place needed fixing. There was. A walk-in cooler that wouldn't hold temperature. I had it running right in an afternoon. Word in a small place travels faster than a grass fire. Within a week, folks were finding their way to me. A widow named Edith 2 ridges over had a generator that wouldn't start. I cleaned the carburetor and got it humming. A young fellow named Cole, couldn't have been 25, had a truck that ran rough, turned out to be injectors, and I walked him through fixing it himself rather than charging him. And that boy near worshipped me after. I worked for a hot meal, for a sack of groceries, for a tank of propane, and more than any of that, for the feeling, which I hadn't felt since long before Ruth got sick, of being a man with two good hands that other people were glad to have around. Cole and his cousins came up one Saturday with a load of lumber Dewey donated off a barn he was tearing down, and we got a real roof over the front half of the house. Edith brought curtains and a butane stove. Somebody got the old propane lines checked and a tank set, and for the first time I had heat I didn't have to feed twigs into all night. The county put my power back on once. Dewey called a man he knew at the co-op and explained the situation. Piece by piece, that dead house came back to life, and I came back to life right along with it. And the thing my children never understood, the thing I'd spent my whole life half knowing but never feeling all the way down. A man's worth has got nothing to do with what's in his bank account. It's in whether the people around him are glad he's there. By that measure, I was getting rich fast. Now, the water. I told you that well saved me. About 6 weeks in, I started noticing the spring that fed it, up behind the house. Past a thicket of blackberry, there was a place where water came straight up out of the rock, cold and clean and steady, and ran off down the hollow in a little creek that never quit, drought or no drought. I'd grown up drinking that water and never thought twice, but living off it now, watching it run the same in dry August as in wet April, I got to wondering about it. That wasn't even the half of what was under that ground, but I'm getting ahead of myself. One afternoon in early fall, a fellow in a clean truck with a magnetic sign on the door came rolling up my lane. He got out, looked around at my 90 acres of ridge and timber with the eyes of a man appraising it, and stuck out his hand. "Curtis Maddox," he said. "I'm a landman. I represent some folks doing energy leasing up and down this part of the county. You the owner here?" I said I was, which I believed but couldn't have proven that morning, and asked him what energy leasing meant. Now, if you're not from gas country, you might not know this, but underneath a big stretch of Pennsylvania, there's a layer of rock called the Marcellus, and inside that rock there's natural gas. Billions of cubic feet of it. For 100 years it sat there because nobody could get it out. Then the technology came along, and all of a sudden land that nobody would have given you a plug nickel for, scrub hills and worn-out hollows, was worth more than the fanciest house in the city. Curtis Maddox sat at my kitchen table, looked at his maps, and told me my 90 acres sat almost dead center over a part of that formation his company had been trying to lease for 2 years. "What's your situation with the title?" he asked me. "You own the mineral rights, or were they severed off somewhere back?" I told him the truth, that I'd inherited the place from my father, never sold a thing off it, but that my son-in-law had recently had me sign some papers and I honestly didn't know what I still owned anymore. Maddox got quiet for a second. "Mr. Brandt," he said, "before this goes 1 inch further, you need a lawyer of your own, not mine. Yours. Because if those papers were drawn up to take this land, and they weren't done exactly right, you might own a whole lot more than you think you do." That's the kind of straight talk I wish somebody had given me in my son-in-law's dining room. He gave me the name of an attorney in the county seat, a man named Harlan Pierce, and I scraped together what I could and went to see him. Harlan Pierce was a lean, gray, careful man who read every one of those documents twice while I sat there sweating. Then he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes and started, almost, to smile. "Mr. Brandt," he said, "your son-in-law is either a crook or a fool, and I'd wager both. This quitclaim deed for the city house, it's signed, but it was never notarized correctly and never recorded with the county. That makes it about as good as a grocery list. The power of attorney is broad, but it doesn't transfer ownership of anything. Just let him act as your agent, and there's a strong argument it was obtained through undue influence on a grieving man, which a court does not like one bit. But here's the thing that matters most to you today." He tapped the folder. "There is not one single document here, not one, that ever touched this farm. The 90 acres outside Greer's Mill have been titled in your name, clean, at the county courthouse since 1986. He never tried to take it because he never thought it was worth taking. The surface is yours. And because nobody ever severed them, the mineral rights are yours too. Every cubic foot of gas under that hill belongs to Calvin Brandt and nobody else. I had to sit down, and I was already sitting down. Pierce and I went after the rest of it too, and over the months that followed with that lawyer working it county by county, I clawed back most of what had been stolen. The house on Fenton Street, what was left of my retirement, even some of the cash. But that's the boring part. The part that mattered was the hill. Curtis Maddox's company sent their geologists out, and they confirmed what the maps promised. Within a few weeks, I had 3 different energy companies bidding against each other for a lease on my 90 acres. The signing bonus alone, money they pay you just to put your name down before they pump a thing, came in north of $400,000. The royalties, the cut I'd get of every dollar of gas they pulled out of that ground for years to come, the experts told me, would run into the millions. Millions. On the worthless hill my son-in-law had dumped me on to die, I sat on my rebuilt front porch that evening with a cup of coffee made from my own spring water, and I laughed until I cried. And then I just cried. Because the only person on earth I wanted to tell was Ruth, and she was the one person I couldn't. If you've made it this far with me, you already know what came next. Because some stories the Lord writes the same way every time. News like that doesn't stay in a valley. Lottie heard it from a cousin. The fellow at the courthouse mentioned it to somebody, and eventually, of course, it got back to the city and it got back to my children. My phone, which had sat silent in a drawer for the better part of 2 months, came alive on a Tuesday night. My son-in-law first. I let it ring out. Then my daughter. Then him again. By midnight there were a dozen missed calls. I turned the thing off and slept better than I had in weeks. When I switched it back on in the morning, there were 17 more, and the voicemail was full, his voice climbing higher and tighter with each one. Dad, we heard some incredible news. Call me back. This is wonderful. We should celebrate as a family. Dad, there's some legal stuff we should handle together. You don't want to deal with those gas people alone. They'll cheat you. Dad, please. I know we had a misunderstanding. Just pick up the phone. A misunderstanding. He'd thrown my bag in the mud and his wife had told me I should have died, and now it was a misunderstanding. By the end of that week, the count was 47. 47 phone calls from the 2 people who, 8 weeks earlier, told me never to call them. I didn't answer a single one. On a Saturday morning, I heard a vehicle laboring up my lane, and I knew before I saw it. They got out together. My son-in-law looked 10 years older and like he hadn't slept in a week, his nice clothes gone wrinkled and sour. My daughter trailed behind him, and she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. They stood at the bottom of my new porch steps I'd cut and set myself, and my son-in-law spread his hands and put on a smile that turned my stomach. "Calvin," he said. "Dad, thank God you're all right. We'd been worried sick." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Worried," I said. "That's a funny word for it. You told me my phone wouldn't do me any good out here. Seems like it did the 2 of you a lot of good, though. 47 times worth." He flinched. He started in then the whole speech. How desperate he'd been, how the business had crushed him, how he never thought the land was worth anything, how if he'd only known about the gas he'd have done things different. And there it was, the whole rotten truth of him, right out in the open. If he'd only known it was worth something, he'd have treated me like a human being. I set my cup down on the rail. "You hear what you just said?" I asked him. "You said if you'd known about the gas, you'd have done different." That's the whole sickness right there, son. The gas didn't make me worth something. I was always worth something. I was your wife's father. I raised the woman you stood beside and made promises to. I built engines and paid my bills and buried my Ruth, and not 1 ounce of my worth ever had a thing to do with what was under that hill. My daughter started to cry then. Real tears, I think, or as real as she had in her. "Daddy," she said, "I was scared. He owed people. I didn't know what else to do. We lost everything, Daddy. The houses are all in foreclosure. Pruitt's lawyer is coming after us. We've got nowhere to live. And I'll be honest with you, listening to that, I didn't feel triumphant. I'd thought I might. All those cold nights I'd imagined this exact moment and figured it to taste sweet. It didn't. It just tasted like loss, like something that had died a long time ago and we were only now getting around to burying. I came down off the porch and stood in front of the two of them, and I said what I'd come to know was true. When your mother was alive, I told my daughter, I'd have walked through fire for you. I did, more times than you ever knew, and the day you left me out here, I kept waiting for the part where you came back. Not because you found out the land was worth money, just because you couldn't stand what you'd done. That day never came. 47 phone calls came, but they only came after the money did. I looked at my son-in-law. I'm going to do one thing for you, and it's more than you'd have done for me. I'm going to give you the number for a man named Harlan Pierce. He'll help you sort out the bankruptcy so you don't end up worse than you have to. After that, you're on your own, the way you told me I was. My son-in-law's face went ugly. After everything we did for you, you stop right there, I said. And something in my voice made him stop. You don't get to stand on my land and tell me what you did for me. Now get back in your truck and go. They went. My daughter looked back once from the cab, and I lifted my hand. Not to wave them on and not to call them back, just to say I saw her the way you'd acknowledge somebody at a graveside. Then the dust took them down the lane and they were gone. And my spring kept right on running behind the house like none of it had ever mattered to the water at all, because to the water it never had. That was a year and a half ago. I want to tell you how it sits with me now because I've had time to let it settle. When that gas money came in, I had a choice, and I made the one I think Ruth would have made. I took the company that promised to hire local crews and use local trucks. Cole runs her equipment outfit now that does half their hauling. Dewey and Lottie's stall keeps the field hands fed. Edith finally got the new roof she'd needed for 10 years. I bought back the Fenton Street house out of pure spite, and then I sold it because that wasn't home anymore. Home was a falling down farmhouse in a hollow outside Greer's mill that my children had left me to die in. And I've rebuilt every board of it with my own hands, and it is the finest place I have ever lived. I haven't spoken to my daughter since that Saturday. Harlan Pierce tells me the bankruptcy went through, that my son-in-law's out of the property business for good, that the two of them are renting an apartment somewhere and that he's hung a hammer back on his belt and gone to work for somebody else, which is honest labor and more than I expected of him. A few months back a card came, forwarded through 3 addresses in my daughter's handwriting. It didn't ask for money. It didn't even ask to be forgiven. It just said she finally understood what she'd done, and that she was sorry, and that she hoped I was warm in the winters now. I haven't written back. Maybe I will. Some wounds you can stitch and some you just have to let scar over, and I'm not all the way sure yet which kind this is, but I've stopped hating her, and at my age that feels like progress enough. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from an old mechanic's story, it's this. There will come a day for most of us when we're slower than we were, when our hands shake a little, when the people who are supposed to love us start looking at us like a cost instead of a person. When that day comes, I pray you've got a hill of your own, and I don't mean gas money, I mean something nobody can sign away. A skill, a neighbor, a way of being useful, the kind of worth that doesn't show up on any deed, because they took my house and my truck and damn near my will to live, but they could never touch the thing that actually made me valuable on account of they never once understood what it was. I'm 70 now. I make the best coffee in Tuscarora County, off a spring my daddy drank from before me, and every morning I wake up in a place where people know my name and are glad I'm in it. which is the only kind of rich I ever needed to be. If you've come this far with me, thank you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. And if there's somebody in your life who's been made to feel like dead weight, you go call them today. Before 47 calls is 47 too late. There's a spring of something good waiting on most of us, friend, if we can just hold on long enough to find it.